Welcome to Spirits in the Shadow, where every story is based on real events passed down through generations. Tonight's story begins in Singapore on a humid August night. A red-wrapped box sits on the doorstep of an HDB flat. No sender, no note, just a white porcelain hand stuck in the corner of a surveillance camera. They say that in the month of loneliness, gifts are contracts. Two stories follow, one born of debt, the other of mercy, both ending with a price. Subscribe to the channel and turn off the lights. Turn up the volume. Want to open it? Chloe Tan wakes before sunrise, the air conditioning hum still faintly cutting through the silence of her apartment. She lies for a second, staring at the soft blue glow of the digital clock, 6:45 a.m., and listens to the city breathing beneath her. Distant engines, elevator motors, the occasional clatter of a neighbor's door. Another workday. She pushes the blanket aside, steps onto the polished floor, and walks toward the bathroom. Everything in her one-bedroom condo has its purpose, its place, minimal, functional, spotless. Even the faint citrus scent of the air freshener feels scheduled. Her phone buzzes with overnight messages, client updates, reminders, a meme from her colleague, and one message from Ma, her grandmother. It's written in simple Chinese characters. Ghost month coming soon. Don't whistle after dark. Don't pick up money on the road. Don't take things that aren't yours. Chloe smiles at the screen. She's heard those words all her life. They used to be bedtime warnings. Now they're just nostalgia folded between emojis and affection. She types back a heart, adds, "Got it," then slips the phone into her bag and leaves. The elevator mirrors reflect a tidy, confident woman. 26, sleek ponytail, neutral lipstick, a navy blazer that whispers ambition. Her company, a mid-tier marketing agency in Singapore, prides itself on being modern, data-driven, culturally aware. To Chloe, that means juggling analytics, design briefs, and team calls until numbers turn into meaning. It means chasing engagement rates the way her grandmother once chased incense smoke. Outside, the morning heat is already rising. The sun bounces off glass towers. Hawker stalls open like rituals of routine. She grabs a kopi from the same stall, nods to the uncle who always hums Hokkien songs, and steps into the MRT with hundreds of strangers who never look up from their phones. Inside that packed silence, the whole city moves like a machine, efficient, clean, and utterly unaware of what lies beneath its polished skin. Her grandmother used to say that Singapore was too young to forget the dead, that every reclaimed piece of land carried stories under its concrete. Chloe never argued, but she never believed either. She respects her grandmother, loves her even. But superstition feels like an antique, beautiful to look at, unnecessary to live by. When Ghost Month arrives, it's simply another week on the corporate calendar. The HR team sends a message wishing employees Happy Hungry Ghost Festival, complete with a cartoon ghost sticker. Chloe laughs, schedules her next campaign call, and adds a joke on her team chat. Guess we'd better feed the algorithm before the spirits. At night, she video calls her grandmother. The old woman's face fills the small screen. Silver hair neatly combed, eyes gentle but sharp. "Girl," she says, "don't bring new things into the house this month. Even a gift can be a debt." Chloe smiles. Ma, I work in marketing. My job is gifts." Her grandmother frowns softly. "Then light incense." Chloe points to a lavender candle on her desk. "Close enough." The call ends with laughter, but the echo of her grandmother's sigh lingers longer than the screen glow. Across the sea, in Manila, the same month unfolds beneath a different sky. The rain has been constant for days, coating the city in gray sheen. Isabel Reyes, 32, wakes to the rattle of the ceiling fan and the distant horns of jeepneys. She pulls the thin blanket away, sits up slowly, and checks her phone. No new messages from her ex-husband, which is good. Silence is easier to manage than half-hearted apologies. Isabel teaches English at a public high school in Quezon City. Her life is a patchwork of pay slips, lesson plans, and long commutes through streets that smell of diesel and wet soil. She likes teaching, mostly because it distracts her. Her students are loud, full of life, and every day they remind her that energy can still exist after heartbreak. She finishes her instant coffee, ties her hair into a bun, and looks around the apartment she's rented since the separation. 1 bedroom, 1 small kitchen, 2 potted succulents she keeps as proof she can still care for something. On the desk sits a porcelain doll with black hair and a cracked cheek, a gift from a student last year. "For luck, ma'am," the girl had said. Isabel accepted it with a smile, thinking little of it. She walks to school under the drizzle, shoes splashing through puddles that mirror the city's chaos, tangled wires, neon pharmacy signs, posters half peeled from walls. In the distance, church bells ring. Isabel doesn't pray anymore, but she still pauses at the sound. Maybe habit, maybe hope. Her colleagues talk about Ghost Month, too. They trade stories about white ladies haunting highways, about voices in old classrooms, about unlucky gifts. "You should put salt at your doorway," one says. "It keeps bad spirits away." Isabel laughs politely. "I'll just lock my door." The others giggle, crossing themselves anyway. In her classroom, she writes, "The supernatural in literature," on the whiteboard. Her students lean forward eagerly. "So, ma'am," one asks, "you believe in ghosts?" Isabel smiles. "I believe in imagination," she says. "Ghosts are what we make when guilt or memory has nowhere else to go." The class nods, half understanding, half disappointed. When the bell rings, thunder rolls above the roof. That afternoon, she walks home through the rain. Water rushes along the gutter, carrying leaves and candy wrappers. The air smells like iron. By the time she reaches her apartment gate, her clothes cling to her skin. She unlocks the door, steps inside, and freezes for a moment. The floor near the doorway is wet, small footprints leading toward the kitchen. She blinks. Only her sandals are by the mat. She wipes the floor dry, shaking her head. Rainwater, nothing else. In Singapore, the same night, Chloe works late. The office is mostly empty except for the hum of computers and the faint smell of instant noodles. She's finalizing slides for a campaign called Charms of the Afterlight. The concept is to merge tradition with modern aesthetics, red ribbons, glowing lanterns, sleek typography. Her art director jokes that they're summoning engagement demons. Chloe laughs and keeps typing. She believes in hard work, not curses. As she leaves the office near midnight, rain begins to fall, thin at first, then steady. In the taxi, she scrolls through her phone, checking client emails. One notification stands out, a message request from an unknown account. It says only, "Don't mock the hungry." No profile picture, no context. She deletes it immediately, probably spam. When she gets home, the hallway lights flicker once as the elevator doors open. She steps out, feeling the faint chill of the corridor despite the humid air. On her neighbor's doormat sits a small red paper bag. She glances at it, curious, probably a festival offering, and walks on. She doesn't notice the faint ash trail leading away from it. In Manila, Isabel grades papers by candlelight after another power outage. The rain outside has turned to a steady drumming on the tin roof. The porcelain doll sits on her desk, facing her. Its glass eyes catch the candle flame. Isabel feels a prick of unease. She turns it toward the wall. A small gesture, nothing more. When the lights come back, she's already forgotten. The next morning, Chloe visits her grandmother. The old woman is knitting by the window of the nursing home, Joss paper folded neatly beside her. "Ah, Ma," Chloe says, "why do you still burn all this? There's no one to collect it." Her grandmother smiles without looking up. "You burn not because they need it, but because you remember." Chloe nods politely, distracted by her phone buzzing with notifications. Before she leaves, her grandmother presses a red thread into her hand. For protection, she says. Don't take it off. Chloe ties it loosely around her wrist to humor her. By the time she gets home that evening, she forgets it's even there. Isabel spends her afternoon preparing exam papers. During lunch, a colleague tells her about an old ritual. During Ghost Month, spirits roam freely looking for comfort or attention. If they like you, they might visit, the woman says. Isabel laughs. Good thing I'm boring. But that night, she dreams. She's standing in her classroom, water dripping from the ceiling. Desks are floating. At the far end, a child sits facing the wall, humming. When she calls out, the humming stops. The child turns slightly. The face is blurred, but the doll's cracked cheek is unmistakable. She wakes drenched in sweat, the ceiling fan spinning lazily above her. On the desk, the doll is turned back toward her bed. She sits upright, heart pounding, then forces a laugh. Dreams borrow from the day, she tells herself. It's just memory organizing itself. She places the doll inside the cabinet this time, closes the door, and goes back to sleep. Chloe's life continues as usual. Presentations, coffee breaks, dinner plans. But subtle things begin to misalign. Her reflection lags for a split second in the mirror. Her phone glitches during video calls. She blames bad Wi-Fi. One evening, as she returns home, she notices incense ashes scattered near her doorway. Someone must have burned offerings nearby. She sweeps them away with a tissue, frowning at the smell that lingers, sweet, metallic, and faintly wet like rain on rust. Her grandmother calls again. "You didn't burn anything, did you?" she asks suddenly. "No, Amma. Why?" The old woman's voice drops. "Sometimes when the dead are ignored, they borrow the living scent." Chloe laughs it off. "You and your drama." But later that night, when she takes out the trash, she hears something down the corridor, a faint knock, rhythmic, as if someone tapping on wood from the inside of a wall. She pauses, listening. It stops. She shrugs it off. Probably the building expanding from humidity. In Manila, Isabel buys groceries in the rain. At the checkout, the cashier hands her a red envelope as part of a store promotion. "Good luck charm, ma'am," the girl says cheerfully. Isabel hesitates, then accepts it, smiling. That night, she leaves it on her desk, unopened. The rain continues until morning. When she wakes, the envelope is gone. In its place sits the porcelain doll, back on the desk, holding a folded piece of paper in its hands. She stares at it for a long time, pulse racing. It's absurd. Impossible. She's alone. She locked the door. She approaches slowly, pries the tiny paper open. It's blank, except for a faint watermark, circles that look almost like wet fingerprints. She throws it away, locks the doll in a drawer, and forces herself to leave for school. Rational people don't feed fear. Chloe, meanwhile, receives a courier at work, a small, red-wrapped box addressed to her name but with no sender. She assumes it's from a client, maybe a product sample. She places it on her desk without opening it. Inside, something shifts softly, like beads or seeds. Her colleague teases, "Your secret admirer?" Chloe laughs, distracted, and pushes the box aside. That evening, she forgets it at the office. When she returns the next morning, the box is on her chair, though she remembers leaving it on the desk. The ribbon is slightly loose. She frowns, ties it tighter, and moves on with her day. Across the sea, Isabel sits at her desk correcting essays. Her students' handwriting loops like nervous energy. Outside, thunder grumbles. The lights flicker, then stabilize. She sighs, rubs her temples, and reaches for her pen, only to find it missing. When she looks down, the doll's small hand rests on it. Her breath catches. She blinks hard, once, twice. The doll's hand hasn't moved, but the pen is there. She whispers, "I'm just tired," then laughs shakily and puts the pen back in her cup. That night, as she falls asleep, she remembers her grandmother's voice. Never accept a gift without knowing who it's for. She dreams again of water humming and small hands pressing against glass. Chloe's city shines brighter than ever. LED billboards, glass towers reflecting each other into infinity, but inside her apartment, the light feels colder. When she turns off the lamp, she hears faint tapping again, this time from the corridor. She opens the door. Nothing's there except a faint red glow near the floor. She bends down. A small offering box burns slowly, the wax pooling at its edges. The smoke curls upward, forming something almost like a shape, then disperses. She stands frozen for a second, then slams the door and tells herself she imagined it. Isabel wakes at 3:17 a.m., the room thick with humidity. The sound of dripping water comes from somewhere near the window. She gets up, follows it, and sees a trail of wet footprints leading away from the glass toward her bed. She stands perfectly still. Outside, lightning flashes, and for an instant, a reflection appears, a small figure standing just behind her. She turns quickly. Nothing. The room is empty except for the slow sway of the curtains. By morning, the footprints are gone. The doll sits neatly on the desk again, its cracked cheek glinting in sunlight. Isabel picks it up carefully and whispers, "Enough." She places it inside a cupboard, locks it, and tapes it shut. Chloe, in her office, finally decides to open the red box, but before she does, a colleague interrupts her. Meeting time. She leaves it on the table and walks away. When she returns an hour later, the box is open. Inside, something glimmers faintly. A single porcelain bead, pale as bone, shaped like an eye. She blinks, unsettled, and quickly closes the lid. Maybe a prank, she thinks. Maybe part of the campaign props. But when she checks the courier log later, there's no record of delivery, no sender, no tracking number. That night, she dreams of corridors lined with red doors, each one slightly open. From inside, whispers echo in a language she doesn't know. In one of the rooms, a woman sits by a table, folding joss paper into boats. When she looks up, her face is Chloe's, but older, expressionless, eyes dark as burnt paper. She wakes with a gasp, the red thread on her wrist gone. In Manila, Isabel doesn't sleep. The rain has stopped, but the silence feels heavier. She sits by the window, watching street lights flicker on puddles. She whispers to herself that everything can be explained. The mind is a projector. Fear is just imagination. But when a soft knock comes from the cupboard, she closes her eyes and pretends she didn't hear. In both cities, the 7th month continues. People burn offerings, sweep ashes, bow to altars. Neon and incense share the same skyline. And Chloe and Isabel, two women of logic and deadlines, walk deeper into an old rhythm they've forgotten how to hear. For now, they are still safe, still busy, still sure that modern life can outshine the old rules. But the world has already chosen them as reminders. In places lit by fluorescent bulbs and rain, 2 doors stand waiting. One will open with a gift, the other with a gaze. And both will ask the same question, whispered softly from the dark. Do you remember the rules? The box looked expensive, but not new. That was the first thing Chloe noticed. The lacquer was black enough to drink the light, but the edges carried tiny chips like teeth marks from time. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the faint resistance of something that didn't want to be opened yet. The silk ribbon had faded to a brownish red, the color of dried plum, and for a second, she thought she smelled earth, not soil from a park, but something deeper, denser, older. She told herself it was imagination. Singapore humidity does that. It makes everything feel alive. The paper tag had no writing, no sender, only a faint ring where a seal might have been pressed and later peeled off. Chloe frowned, the way she always did when details didn't line up. Maybe it was a marketing stunt, or maybe a neighbor sent something early for Ghost Month and forgot to include a note. She smiled at the thought. Old traditions wrapped in modern confusion. She had deadlines, meetings, a launch to run. This wasn't the kind of mystery she had time for. Still, curiosity is a quiet kind of gravity. She untied the ribbon. The lid opened with a sigh, soft and deliberate, like a breath that had waited too long to be released. Inside was a piece of jade, green so dark it looked almost black, carved into a simple bangle. The silk lining underneath wasn't the clean, perfect red of a jewelry box. It was mottled, like blood that had soaked and dried and then been folded over. Her fingers hesitated an inch above it. The air around the box was cool, unnaturally so. The rest of the apartment was warm from the afternoon sun, but here a ring of cold seemed to hover. She laughed quietly. "Air conditioning leak," she muttered, even though she knew it wasn't. She picked up the bangle. It felt like it had been kept underground, a chill so pure it numbed her fingertips. Without thinking, she slipped it over her hand. It caught for a moment on her knuckles, then slid perfectly into place. No gap, no slack. It fit as though it had been measured against her wrist while she slept. The phone rang. The sound startled her, too sharp, too loud for the small apartment. She answered. "Ah, Ma," her grandmother's voice soft and serious. "Convenachua hamneko I tangi kong." Chloe smiled. "Kong a just work." "Jung hanjo la," her grandmother said. "Nhat la thang nai. Mon kwa nao kung ko gya." Chloe rolled her eyes affectionately. "Yes, Ma, it's just a box." Her grandmother was quiet for a beat too long. "No lo roy, jung je gan jiao gyuong," she said finally. "Va jung noi doi." Chloe promised nothing. When the call ended, she stared at her wrist. The jade had already warmed slightly, almost like skin on skin. She flexed her hand. The bangle didn't move. Perfect fit, she told herself. She liked things that fit. Shoes, plans, relationships. Maybe this was karma rewarding efficiency. She set the box aside, half amused, half uneasy, and returned to her laptop. Work was grounding. Deadlines didn't care about ghosts. Across the sea, in Manila, Isabel was finishing her online class. Her students had already logged out, their little camera squares blinking to black one by one. She rubbed her temples and leaned back. The apartment was quiet except for the rain, steady and tropical, falling in silver sheets against the windows. Her phone buzzed, a message from the building's reception. "Delivery for Ms. Reyes, no sender." She frowned. No one sent her things anymore. Not since the divorce, not since she'd quietly told friends she needed space. Still, she went downstairs. The box was wrapped in old-style brown paper, tied with twine. The address was typed on a yellowing label, corners curling like dried petals. "Maybe a student's thank you gift," she murmured. Teachers got strange offerings sometimes. Letters, handmade bookmarks, occasionally food. She carried it upstairs, shaking off her umbrella by the door. When she unwrapped it, a porcelain face stared back. An antique doll, dressed in a Maria Clara gown, pale blue silk trimmed with lace. Its glass eyes were too clear, too reflective. For a moment she saw her own face doubled there, tired, smiling out of politeness. The doll's hair was real, or looked real, black strands twisted into a bun. "Creepy," she said, laughing under her breath, the kind of thing her students might find charmingly haunted. She placed it on the shelf above her TV. It looked harmless there, framed by her books on education and psychology. Harmless, but watching. That night, around 3:33 a.m., she woke to the sound of a child crying. The kind of small, lost sound that turns your bones soft before your mind catches up. She sat up in bed, listening. It came from the living room, not loud, just steady. A tired, rhythmic sob like something trying to be gentle. She told herself it was the neighbors. The walls were thin. Maybe someone's baby had colic. Or maybe it was a cat. Manila nights were full of cats that sounded too human. She turned on her side and pulled the blanket higher. When she woke again, sunlight filled the apartment. Everything looked fine, except the doll's silk gown was wet. She touched it. The dampness clung to her skin, cold and faintly salty. She checked the ceiling. No leak, no open window. "Humidity," she said out loud. "Old fabric." Her voice didn't sound convinced, Chloe dreamed that night. She stood in a graveyard she didn't recognize. Low stone walls, white flowers, a haze that wasn't fog, but something closer to breath. A woman stood by a row of graves, wearing the same jade bangle, the same color as hers. The woman's eyes were calm, but her mouth was moving. Chloe couldn't hear the words at first, only the wind weaving through the trees. Then the sound came clear, like something whispered directly into her ear. Konjang mangjo kwa ta. You are wearing my things. The words curled through her dream and into her waking breath. She opened her eyes at 3:47 a.m., heart thudding. The room was quiet. The air conditioning hummed. Her wrist was cold again. She touched the jade. Still there, still perfect, still beautiful. She turned on her side and told herself she'd been scrolling too much before bed. Brains mimic screens, she muttered. Dream algorithms. But by morning, the thought lingered. At work, people noticed the bangle immediately. Nice piece, someone said. So old school. Your grandma? Gift, she said simply. Not sure who from. Must be fate, a coworker teased. Chloe laughed. Or good marketing. But the word fate stayed in her mind longer than it should have. Later, washing her hands in the restroom, she noticed a faint green line around her wrist where the jade sat. A stain? A reaction? She rubbed it. It didn't fade. Maybe body oils, maybe dye. She checked Google. Can jade stain skin? The results were nonsense. Spiritual forms and crystal healers claiming jade absorbs energy. She closed the tab quickly, embarrassed by her own curiosity. Isabel, meanwhile, had decided to get rid of the doll. It wasn't that she believed in ghosts. She didn't. But waking up twice to the sound of crying was enough to make her feel ridiculous. She wrapped the doll in a grocery bag and placed it outside her door. Let the janitor deal with it. Problem solved. Or so she thought. The next morning, it was back on the shelf. Same position, same tilt of the head. The plastic bag was gone. She froze, one hand still holding her coffee mug. The liquid rippled. Okay, she whispered, half laughing, half not. Someone's pranking me. She glanced at the window, still locked. Her apartment was on the 7th floor. No one could just walk in. She leaned closer. The doll's eyes seemed shinier, wet almost. She reached out, touched its cheek, cold porcelain. I need better sleep, she muttered, and went to work. Chloe's grandmother called again that afternoon. Ah, mamo tai jo jua con qua, she said. Ko I mak jo tang. Chloe felt a shiver crawl down her neck. It's nothing, Ma, just work dreams. Her grandmother's voice softened. Nu I cho kon thu jep, kon nen biet vi sao, ko thun goi tatang jen ho, ko thun goi tatang jele lai. I'll visit this weekend, Chloe said, wanting to end the call. Tonight, her grandmother said, but Chloe was already glancing at her emails. That evening, as Chloe removed the bangle to shower, it resisted. The jade clung to her skin, almost pulsing. When it finally slipped free, she saw the faintest impression of a circle left behind. Not a rash, not bruising, just color, like something had been painted under the skin. She left it on the counter and stepped under the water, trying to let the sound erase her thoughts. But behind the steady stream, she swore she heard a voice, not outside, not even in her head, but right at the edge of the sound. Return it. She froze. Steam gathered around the mirror. Stress, she whispered, just stress. She turned off the water and wiped the mirror clean. Her reflection looked exactly like her, except the bangle was back on her wrist. In Manila, Isabel dreamed too. The sound of crying became words this time, not Filipino, not English, but something half between prayer and pleading. She saw a child's hands pressed against glass, and behind the glass, her own reflection watching. When she woke, her heart felt heavy, her pillow damp. She got up, turned on every light, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The air smelled faintly of incense from a neighbor's offering. She looked back into the apartment. The doll was gone. Relief came like a breath until she noticed the faint trail of wet footprints leading from the shelf to the balcony door, child-sized, glistening under the light and ending halfway across the tiles. She didn't scream. Teachers don't scream, they analyze. She fetched a towel, wiped the floor, and opened the balcony door. The city spread out below, loud and alive. Maybe it had always been water. Maybe her mind wanted patterns because patterns meant control. She whispered, "You're tired," as if the apartment needed to hear it. Chloe took the box to her grandmother's temple the next morning. She didn't tell anyone. She just wanted to end it quietly. The temple sat between a car workshop and a noodle stall, the scent of oil and incense mixing strangely. An old caretaker nodded as she approached. "Offering?" he asked. "Or return?" "Return," she said before she could think. He nodded once. "Leave it near the gate. Don't look back." She placed the box down, the silk lining flashing once in the light. As she turned, she caught movement in the corner of her eye. A woman in white standing by the incense table, her wrist bare, her eyes calm. Chloe didn't look back. She walked to the street, hailed a cab, and only when she was inside did she realize her wrist was light again. The mark was fading. In Manila, Isabel carried the doll to the church bazaar. She told the woman at the donation desk that it was an antique. The woman smiled, delighted. "Perfect condition," she said. "Collectors will love it." Isabel smiled too. "Please handle it carefully," she said. The woman laughed. "Don't worry. These old dolls, they survive everything." Isabel nodded, though her stomach tightened. She left quickly, walking home in the heavy heat of afternoon. That night, for the first time in days, Isabel slept without interruption. No crying, no footsteps, just rain outside. She dreamed of a child playing near a fountain, laughing free. When she woke, sunlight spilled across the floor. She felt light. She made coffee and went to the shelf. It was empty. She smiled, and then noticed a faint ring of moisture where the doll had stood, perfectly circular, slowly drying. Chloe's grandmother called again that day. "Matay ne roy," she said. "Ngoy tanan lai roy." Chloe exhaled. "Good," she said softly. She didn't ask how her grandmother knew. Some things don't require explanation. That evening, as she prepared for bed, she glanced at her wrist one last time. The skin was smooth, unmarked. But when she turned off the lights, she thought, only thought, maybe imagined, she saw a faint green glow fade into the dark, like a leaf sinking into deep water. Across the sea, Isabel's phone buzzed, a message from the church. "The doll found a new home. Collector very happy. Says it cries sometimes when no one's around. Must be humidity, ha ha." Isabel stared at the text for a long moment, the cursor blinking below the laughing emoji. Then she turned off her phone, closed her eyes, and whispered the same sentence Chloe had whispered to her own shadow. "It's over." But even as she said it, both women felt the same strange awareness settle around them. A quiet truth every culture understands during Ghost Month. Nothing truly leaves until it's acknowledged. The nights that followed were quiet, but never completely silent. In Singapore, Chloe sometimes woke just before 3:47, not because of noise, but because the air seemed to thicken for a second, like someone passing through the room, polite enough not to disturb her, but present enough to be felt. In Manila, Isabel began keeping a small candle on her shelf, not for faith, but for balance. On the night of the 7th day after she'd given away the doll, the candle burned twice as fast as usual. The wax dripped into a circle, then hardened into a shape like a bracelet. She didn't mention it to anyone. She just cleaned it quietly, whispering thanks into the air. And somewhere, in some unseen thread between the two cities, the jade cooled, the silk dried, the porcelain stilled. But the rule remained, waiting for the next person to forget it. Accepting means acknowledging, and acknowledging means owing. Every culture phrases it differently, but the meaning is the same. So if, during Ghost Month, a gift appears at your door, no name, no note, no reason, ask yourself before opening, are you ready for the story it brings? Because some gifts aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to remember you. The smell began so faint that Chloe thought it came from someone's incense a few floors below. At dawn it was a whisper, sweet and resinous. By evening it saturated the sealed air of her apartment like invisible smoke that refused to drift away. She opened every window, every vent, every cupboard, but the air still carried the smell of prayer, thick, old, and not hers. The corridor outside was neutral. The other flat smelled of detergent, dinner, rain on concrete. Inside, the air clung to her skin like second breath. On the third morning, she found the bowl. It sat on her kitchen counter, white porcelain, hairline cracked, with rice still steaming faintly though she hadn't cooked. 3 folded joss papers lay beside it, corners slightly singed as if someone had tested them with flame. The front door was locked, the chain in place, no sign of entry. Chloe stood for a long time, her body frozen in the small hum of the refrigerator. The logical part of her brain listed possibilities: neighbor's prank, memory lapse, grandma's superstition materializing by coincidence. But when she lifted the bowl, it was warm in her hands. She threw the rice away and told herself it was done. That night, the smell grew heavier. The smoke alarm blinked without sound. When she reached for her phone to distract herself, every music app froze mid-song, static rushing in like old radio interference, something between a chant and a wail. She switched off the phone, and the silence came down too fast, as if she had cut the wrong wire. Far south in Manila, Isabel tried to ignore the way the doll had turned. Yesterday, she'd marked its position with a pencil line on the wall, just a teacher's small experiment in sanity. This morning, the doll's glassy eyes pointed half a degree toward the window, and the pencil line mocked her quietly from behind. Its silk dress was damp again, darker at the hem, smelling faintly of salt and earth. Isabel pressed her fingers into the fabric. The moisture seeped between them. There were no leaks in the ceiling, no spilled water. It was as though the doll had been out walking in the rain and come back to rest. She turned on the radio for company, searching for anything mundane, traffic reports, soap operas, jingles about laundry detergent. But every station carried the same thin wailing, a woman's voice in a minor key, echoing against something hollow. Funeral opera, every frequency. She switched it off. Rain ticked against the glass, polite at first, then restless. That evening, she dreamed of a child's hands gripping her wrist underwater. She woke at 3:33, the window wide open, though she had latched it before bed. The doll sat on her chest, light but real enough that her lungs hesitated between inhale and scream. She flung it aside, heart hammering, and it rolled onto the floor with a sound not like porcelain, but like a small exhale. In Singapore, the jade bracelet was changing color. The green seemed deeper, veins of blue flashing when she turned her wrist. It had been snug since she first put it on, but now it pressed into her skin as if remembering how small the wrist had once been. She tried to slide it off. It refused to move. By nightfall, a ring of bruising bloomed beneath the stone, purple edged with green, the color of an old healing wound, though she had done nothing to earn it. At the office, she caught herself rubbing the jade constantly. Her coworker noticed the bruise and suggested a doctor. The doctor said maybe dermatitis, maybe circulation, prescribed a cream, and offered an indifferent smile. When he tapped the jade with his metal pen, it rang faintly, like a bell from underground. "You can have a jeweler saw it off," he said. Chloe laughed thinly. "It doesn't have a clasp." He nodded, already writing the next note. That night, when she washed her hands, the water beaded around the jade as if the stone repelled purity. She left the tap running too long, just to hear another sound besides her breathing. Across the sea, Isabel tried to reason herself out of panic. She wrapped the doll in an old towel, placed it outside her apartment door, and locked the door twice. When she opened it in the morning, the towel was empty. The doll was back on the table, exactly where it had been, head slightly tilted, eyes catching a sliver of sunrise like tears that hadn't decided to fall. At school, Isabel's students noticed she jumped at every child's laughter. "Ma'am, are you okay?" one asked. "You look tired." She smiled, teacher's reflex intact. "Too much coffee," she said. She didn't drink coffee. That evening, while grading essays, she heard the faintest voice from behind her, not a sound like speech, more like a breath pushing through a toy's cracked mouth. "Don't leave me." She froze, pen suspended midair. The voice came again, slightly louder, the vowels small and round, the tone heartbreakingly polite. "Don't leave me." Isabel turned slowly. The doll was facing her. She stared until her vision blurred, forcing herself to blink so she wouldn't imagine motion. The radio switched on by itself, tuning through stations until it found that same funeral wail. The air trembled with it. Isabel whispered, "Who are you?" The voice sighed, "Don't leave me." Chloe went to the jeweler the next morning. The shop smelled of metal filings and dust, a safe mechanical smell. The man peered through his loupe and frowned. "Burial jade," he said quietly. "See the cloudy core. This came from under earth with someone still wearing it." His fingers shook slightly. "We don't cut this. Sometimes the stone remembers." "I can't take it off." "Then go to the temple first. Don't rush." She left the shop with her pulse pounding in her ears. On the way home, she bought oranges without thinking, as if her grandmother's habit had climbed into her muscles. When she reached her flat, the air inside was freezing. The smell of incense was now thick enough to taste, bittersweet, the edge of smoke that had nowhere to go. She found new rice on the counter, steaming gently. The bowl from before, uncracked this time. She turned every light on. Her reflection in the window looked pale, older. The jade pulsed faintly with its own light. When she touched it, it was cold enough to make her bones ache. Isabel's mother arrived with a folk healer, a short man with a gentle boredom that suggested long practice. He brought a small mirror and a candle. "We'll see who's home," he said softly. He placed the mirror in front of the doll and lit the candle. The flame bent sideways. He muttered prayers under his breath, language skipping between Latin and Tagalog. Then he turned the mirror slightly. The doll's eyes followed. The reflection blinked one beat slower than the real eyes. The healer sucked his teeth and whispered, "Spirit bound." Someone tied a child's soul inside. To send it away, they must anchor it to someone living. Isabel's heart clenched. "To me?" He nodded. "It's chosen you. It will ask for love until you give it. Once you do, it won't leave. You must give it back before it believes you belong to it." "How?" "Salt, thread, prayer. But don't listen to it. It lies with pity." He wrapped the doll in white cloth, sprinkled salt, tied red string. The doll twitched once, faintly, as if a bubble had burst inside it. "Keep it near the door," he said. "Bring it to the church at sunrise, and remember, no promises." After he left, Isabel sat staring at the wrapped bundle. The air was heavy, the fan stuttering in the socket. She heard the faintest whisper beneath the hum. "Don't leave me." In Singapore, Chloe's grandmother arrived unannounced, carrying fruit and worry. The moment she stepped in, her eyes darted to the corners of the room. "Cold," she said. "Too cold." She saw the rice bowl, nodded once, and began muttering a prayer Chloe hadn't heard since childhood. When she saw the bracelet, she didn't touch it. "This is not for living skin. You must give it rest." "I can't remove it. Then we go to the temple. You don't ask it to leave. You thank it first." At the temple, the air shimmered with heat and chanting. Chloe bowed before the altar, lighting 3 sticks of incense. The smoke rose cleanly at first, then bent sideways, curling toward her wrist as if drawn by recognition. She held her breath. The monk tied a red string around her arm above the jade, whispering words of protection. The jade pulsed once, subtle, like a heartbeat responding. Chloe felt the cold fade a little. That night, she slept dreamlessly for the first time in weeks, but at 3:47 she woke with a start. The bracelet was glowing faintly, and her hand hung off the side of the bed. When she pulled it up, grains of rice fell from her palm, scattering like small bones. Isabel woke at 3:33, heart pounding. The cloth bundle by the door had moved closer to her bed. The red thread was loose. She felt something small press against her ankle, a weight like a child's head. She turned on the light. The doll lay beside her, eyes open, lips parted as if breathing. She screamed, grabbed the bundle, and ran into the hallway. Her neighbor's doors stayed shut. No one came out. At dawn, she carried the doll to the nearest church. The door was locked. She sat on the steps with the bundle in her lap, whispering every prayer she could remember from childhood, mixing names of saints with half-remembered lullabies. When the first parish worker arrived, she thrust the bundle forward. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "Take it." The woman hesitated, then nodded, setting it beside the altar of forgotten offerings, broken rosaries, photos, candles burnt to waxy ghosts. Isabel went home shaking. For the first time, the radio stayed silent. She lay on the couch, feeling empty in the way peace and shock sometimes share a body. When she drifted into sleep, she dreamed of a little girl playing by the ocean, dropping shells into the surf, whispering, "Thank you," before dissolving into foam. In Singapore, Chloe's reprieve didn't last. The next evening, while washing dishes, she noticed the bracelet had darkened, the bruise underneath now shaped like a fingerprint not her own. She called the jeweler again, voice tight. "Please cut it off." He told her to come at closing. When she arrived, the shop was empty except for him. He set her wrist on a padded mat, started the saw. The blade touched jade and snapped. Sparks spat, the air sharp with ozone. "It doesn't want this," he whispered. Chloe's arm burned. The jade stayed perfect, unscarred. The jeweler backed away, muttering prayers she didn't recognize. "Go home," he said hoarsely. "Burn incense. Speak its name if it tells you." She went home and stood before her mirror. "Who are you?" she whispered to the reflection. The room chilled. Her reflection smiled first. Across Manila, the rain stopped. Isabel taught her class, forcing normalcy into each sentence. But when she erased the chalkboard, the dust formed 3 words. "Don't leave me." Her students giggled, thinking it a prank. She laughed too loudly and erased again until the board shone. After school, she passed a toy shop and froze. The same doll sat in the window, eyes painted wrong, lips parted too wide. The tag read, "One of a kind." She walked home fast, not looking at her reflection in the windows. That night, she dreamed of Chloe, though she didn't know her name, just a woman in another city, struggling with a jade bracelet. Both women dreamed of the same voice, whispering between their worlds, threading one debt through 2 wrists. Chloe woke before dawn to a weight on her chest, soft but insistent. The smell of incense was unbearable now, like 1,000 offerings burning at once. She gasped and saw for a moment another woman's face hovering above hers, the one from her dreams, pale and patient. "You wear my gift," the woman said without moving her lips. "Return it." "I don't know how," Chloe whispered. "Then I will stay." The jade flared cold, pain shooting up her arm. She screamed. The lights flickered, every radio in nearby flat switching on at once, broadcasting the same funeral song Isabel had been hearing for weeks. At the exact moment, in Manila, the church candles near the donation box snuffed out. The caretaker found the doll gone, only the red thread remaining, coiled like shed skin. The haunting had bridged itself. Chloe collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The bracelet finally loosened, sliding off with a sound like breath leaving a body. It hit the tiles and cracked cleanly down the middle. Inside, a sliver of cloth, crimson faded to brown, thin as memory. She reached out, but her grandmother's hand caught hers. "Leave it," the old woman said firmly. "It's done." In Manila, Isabel woke to a sunbeam breaking through cloud. Her radio played only static. The shelf where the doll had stood was empty, except for a single grain of rice. Neither woman ever spoke of it again. But sometimes, months later, when August returned and Ghost Month began anew, both would pause in the middle of their separate mornings and glance at their wrists, feeling for the weight that wasn't there, and smell faintly the scent of sandalwood, a reminder that some gifts never truly leave. They only loosen their hold. The sound began like metal tearing underwater, high and wet and endless, a shriek that tunneled through Chloe's skull before it twisted into something like a woman's breathing. The car jolted, tires screaming as she hit the brake. Horns exploded behind her. Rain pulsed on the causeway like knuckles tapping a coffin lid. She didn't need the mirror to know, but she looked anyway. The back seat was no longer empty. A woman sat there, pale as steamed rice, hair pinned in the style of an old funeral portrait, the edge of a burial blouse showing under a translucent shawl. Her mouth was too gray, her eyes too calm. The air smelled of wet dirt, camphor, and something faintly metallic, like the taste of coins left too long in the rain. Chloe's fingers locked around the wheel. She could feel the jade bracelet biting deeper with small ticks, tightening as if each second of disbelief was a new notch in a contract. The ghost smiled the way photographs sometimes do, polite, permanent, impossible to argue with. 4 days, she whispered as if reciting scripture. 4 debts, pay with youth, with health, with breath. Chloe could feel the breath part, half hers, half something borrowed. Traffic crept. The city lights stretched in the rain, gold bleeding into green, red smearing into the sheen of the causeway like spilled blood turned abstract. The bracelet pulsed with heat that wasn't heat. A faint singing began, static folding into funeral opera, the same melody she'd heard in her grandmother's house during Hungry Ghost Month, a tune that told the living when to close their mouths. Every radio frequency carried it now. The ghost tilted her head, eyes narrowing with gentle condescension. "You wore the grave goods," she said softly. "Acknowledging is owing. Interest accrues." Chloe forced air into her lungs. "Johor," she croaked, as if naming a refuge could build a road. "I just need to reach Johor." The ghost nodded, as if pleased she remembered the debt's geography. Return what was stolen. Each hand must touch earth again. And then she was gone, replaced by the smell of soil after rain. The bracelet twitched once like a living pulse. Chloe accelerated through the blur of trucks and buses, her hands trembling as if the steering wheel might vanish without permission. In another city, another kind of night was opening its throat. Isabel stood inside an old stone church in Manila, its plaster walls peeling like paper left in humid air. Rain whispered against the stained glass, and the saints' faces swam under it. The folk medium, a woman with braided gray hair and the posture of someone who had carried too many names across the threshold, had arranged small bowls of salt water along the aisle. In each floated a paper boat folded from prayer sheets, petals of frangipani resting on the surface like tired moons. At the altar, the antique Maria Clara doll waited, silk skirt damp from rain that should not have reached it, glass eyes blank as eggshells under the candlelight. Its mouth was cracked in the corner, as if it had tried to smile once and regretted the decision. Banishment or release, the medium had asked earlier, the words tasting like judgment and mercy at once. Compassion is risk. Die. Isabel had chosen release because she could not bear the idea of shoving a child, any child, back into the dark just to save herself. Now, standing before the altar, she could feel the cost of that decision breathing up through the wooden floor. A small, cold hand settled on hers, fingers soft, weightless, precise. She didn't pull away. "I'm here," she said, voice trembling. The candle flames leaned inward, drawn by a wind that had no direction. The doll's chest rose, not visibly, but through the sound of air expanding in wood, a long exhale that filled the nave with an odor of wax and damp soil. Footprints appeared on the floorboards, wet, small, marching toward the altar and stopping halfway. They waited. The medium's chant began, low and rhythmic, syllables from a tongue older than the church itself. The air trembled. Shadows slipped down from the rafters, bending around the pews like obedient animals. Then the child came into shape, a shimmer first, then a form, a thin figure with a round face, hair plastered against its forehead, eyes like two white holes that swallowed the light around them. Its uniform was the kind worn by school children in the 1950s, shirt and dark shorts soaked through. When it turned toward Isabel, the temperature dropped so fast her breath clouded in front of her mouth. The sound that followed wasn't a cry or a scream. It was a sigh shaped into the wrong syllables, the kind of noise a mouth makes when memory hurts more than words. "I won't send you away," she whispered. The doll twitched. Its porcelain jaw clicked open just far enough for steam to curl from its lips. Chloe's car reached the other shore just as her phone died. The ghost hadn't returned to sight, but her scent lingered, earthy and faintly sweet, like embalming herbs steeped too long in the sun. The old master's house stood past the border, low-roofed, flanked by bamboo and rusted lanterns that shivered in the wind. He waited at the doorway, as if her panic had called him hours ago. His eyes were like burnt sugar, dark and brittle. He said nothing, only gestured her inside. The ghost followed without a step. "Burial jade," he murmured when he saw the bracelet, hungry but not yet satisfied. He filled a ceramic bowl with salt, ashes, and shredded leaves that smelled of rain on iron, then set a clay cup beside it. He lifted a pestle and struck the bowl. The sound was dull at first, then deeper, until it became a bell that filled the room's corners. The bracelet vibrated like an insect caught in glass. He struck again, faster, 7 times, a rhythm that seemed to pull the air into a single taut thread. The ghost's hair rippled, though there was no wind. Outside, the car's radio screamed and fell silent. When he stopped, he exhaled like a man returning from the bottom of a deep pool. He lifted her wrist and examined the jade. Up close, it was no longer green but layered gray, veins of darkness swimming beneath the stone. He whispered, not to her, but to the thing bound inside. "You're owed," he said, "but you've mistaken hunger for justice." Then he twisted. The bracelet didn't shatter. It crumbled. The fragments fell like soil, spilling dry leaves and brittle strands of hair. A breath escaped the ghost, a sound halfway between sobbing and relief. "Debt reduced," the old man said, "not erased. For peace, it must return to earth." He handed Chloe the clay cup. "Drink." The tea burned her throat with the taste of lemon and ashes and the faint sweetness of something she couldn't name. The ghost drifted closer, her face softer, less cruel. "Go to where it was stolen," the master said. "Return what remains. Speak the names. Let the soil remember." He looked at the ghost. "Ah, Chifu, you will walk with her." The ghost bowed, almost human. Meanwhile, inside the church, the chant built until the roof seemed to vibrate. The child's outline sharpened. Its mouth opened, and a trickle of water slid down its chin. The medium shook salt from her hand into the air, and the grains burned with a small blue flame before vanishing. The child flinched, not from pain, but from recognition. The candlelight twisted. The shadows grew ribs. A second presence woke, heavier, older, as if the church itself decided to remember what it had buried. The pews groaned. The stained glass saints darkened to bruised colors. The doll rose an inch and dropped again with a porcelain thud. Isabel's pulse fluttered. "Show me home," she whispered, trembling but steady. The air folded inward. A sound like a door opening beneath water echoed through the nave. The boy pointed toward the back pew. The medium's voice hardened. "Who bound you?" she demanded. The air rippled around the spot, thickening with the residue of guilt. Isabel felt it, a heat that wasn't physical, the ghost memory of hands counting money, sealing deals, treating relics as antiques instead of graves. "The dealer," Isabel breathed. The medium nodded grimly. "Then we unmake his link." The child began to walk, steps soft, leaving wet marks that evaporated instantly. Behind him, the air trembled like a string. "If you need a breath to cross," Isabel said, "take mine." The medium turned sharply. "Don't," but the child had already leaned close. The contact was neither kiss nor theft. It was precision, the transfer of one held breath to another. Isabel gasped, her lungs locked, then flooded with air-cold as well water. The boy's face brightened, the fog lifting from his eyes. He turned toward the door. The paper boats followed, moving as though pulled by a tide only they could see. The older presence tried to anchor him. The medium's bell rang 3 times, metal biting metal, forcing the dark shape back. The church shook, candles flared, rain crashed against the windows. The boy stopped at the doorway, looked back once, eyes now gray instead of white, calm instead of hollow, and stepped into the rain. The doll collapsed inward, the silk skirt sinking like a flower closing at dusk. Chloe's ritual wasn't over. The master led her through back roads to a fenced patch of overgrown soil behind an abandoned housing project. The ghost followed, her form faint but visible, hair trailing like mist. "Here," the master said, "this was once a graveyard. The marker's gone, but the memory isn't." The rain had slowed to a drizzle that smelled of rust. Chloe knelt in the mud. The bracelet remnants, packed in paper, pulsed faintly in her palm. "Say their names," the master instructed. "The thieves, the dealer, the giver. The chain must be spoken to break." Chloe hesitated. The first name came like a cough. She didn't know she knew it until it tore free. The second was foreign, but fit her mouth like an echo. The third she whispered with venom, her colleague, the one who had handed her the box wrapped in red paper, laughing about good fortune. The ground shivered, mud bubbled. The ghost knelt beside her, fingers pressing into the soil. The act felt wrong in every theology Chloe had ever heard, a spirit kneeling with the living. But it also felt right, as if apology needed to be witnessed by both sides. "Return it," the ghost murmured. Chloe pressed the jade dust into the earth. It sank, leaving no mark, only the smell of moss and something freed. The old man closed his eyes. "Dead acknowledged," he said. "2 entries remain. The breath is the last." The ghost turned to Chloe, her features flickering like a candle about to steady. "If I wear your face, it's because someone chose me to have it. Find that someone. Return the choice." Then she faded, a mist retreating into soil. Chloe's arm throbbed. The bruise where the bracelet had bitten now formed a faint ring, like a shadow of a chain just removed. In the church, the medium exhaled hard. The air settled. The paper boats floated in still water. The candles straightened. Isabel sat down, trembling, laughter and tears fighting in her throat. The medium checked her pulse and nodded. "He's gone." "No," Isabel whispered. "He's free." The doll lay collapsed beside the altar, mouth sealed. Outside, thunder rolled away like a closing gate. Back on the causeway, dawn began to bleed into the horizon, pale orange cutting through gray. Chloe drove slowly this time. The radio was silent, but in the corner of her mirror, a shape flickered once. Just a woman's face, soft, almost grateful, then gone. The bracelet mark glowed faintly, fading each minute like ink surrendering to skin. She didn't smile. Some debts don't end. They convert into vigilance. What followed that night became 2 stories told in different cities, but linked by the same rule. Compassion is risk. Isabel would keep a bowl of salt water by her window each August, a promise to the souls who wait for kindness. Chloe would visit the cemetery every ghost month, lighting incense not for herself, but for the woman whose bridal laughter had been stolen and sold. Neither believed in easy peace, only in temporary truces between the living and the remembered. And so, at the terrifying peak of both hauntings, when the ghosts finally manifested in full, one through a doll's hollow breath, one through jade and blood, neither woman screamed. They listened. Because the most frightening demand from the dead isn't violence, it's ethics. Return what was taken, speak what was silenced, free what was bound. That is the language of balance. The bracelet's dust sleeps beneath a Johor rain tree now. The doll rests in a church drawer wrapped in linen. Both are quiet. For now. If you're still here, lights off, heart beating too loud, ask yourself, if something bound to you asked for release, would you give a breath to grant it? Would you risk your youth, your warmth, your comfort to correct another's debt? Or would you choose safety and call it reason? Comment your answer. And subscribe, because every story you ignore has a way of finding its listener. Chloe didn't run. She simply stopped staying. Her body left the office, the condo, the routines that used to make sense, as if peeling away layers of skin that no longer fit. Every place she had lived or worked held the echo of a whisper, the smell of incense where there should have been detergent. The bracelet was gone, but its mark stayed, a pale ring like frost etched into her wrist. When she washed dishes, she could feel the pressure of that invisible band, the weight of something that used to belong to the dead. She told herself it was imagination, but her body didn't believe her. She spent her nights retracing how everything began, scribbling arrows on paper until every line ended in Kevin's name. The Chinatown ledgers had listed him as a buyer, not of antiques, but of shortcuts, burial goods cleaned and resold, talismans repainted to look fresh. It had seemed harmless, a business of symbols, but symbols are contracts in disguise. He had crossed her path again, not by fate, but by choice. He wanted her to wear the curse he couldn't bear himself. She tracked him down through colleagues, through rumor, through the smell of guilt. The apartment was locked from the inside. No response to knocking. The neighbors said they'd heard chanting, like someone reciting words he didn't understand. When the police finally broke the door, they found Kevin in a chair by the window, eyes wide, hands bleeding from scratching at air. The nurses said he screamed about jewelry that wouldn't come off. Chloe didn't go inside. She didn't need to. She had seen enough to know the balance had already swung back. The Johor master called it karmic reversion. Every theft of the sacred has its echo, and sometimes the echo lands where it started. You don't need to punish him, he told her. The unseen world already counts. Chloe wanted to believe him, but she also wanted to see the ledger balanced, not just cosmically, but concretely. She needed to end it properly, to give back what wasn't hers, to close the loop. That was how she found herself boarding a plane to Guangdong with the cracked jade locked in a red cloth, tucked between her passport and a pack of tissue. The flight was long, the clouds the color of bone dust. She slept lightly, drifting between waking and dream, hearing voices that sounded like breath drawn through hollow bamboo. In one dream, the woman with the pale face waited at a doorway, holding out her wrists for something Chloe couldn't see. When Chloe tried to step closer, the woman whispered, "Return me," and the world dissolved. In the village, she climbed the hill where tombs crouched like sleeping animals. The caretaker led her to a plot that had partially collapsed, its offerings scattered by rain and roots. "They used to say a thief came years ago," he murmured, "took bracelets and coins. After that, no one cleaned the grave." The monk who came with her prepared cinnabar paste and paper seals. Chloe unwrapped the bracelet. It looked almost harmless now, dulled by time, but when the monk touched it, he flinched. "It remembers," he said. "Everything remembers. They buried it with prayers." Chloe didn't know the language fully, so she whispered her own words in English. "I wore what wasn't mine. I'm sorry." The monk nodded, as though apology had a frequency the dead could hear. As they sealed the tomb, A soft wind rolled through the pines, lifting the incense smoke into a single ribbon. For a moment, the ribbon took the shape of a woman smiling, then disappeared into the ground. Chloe stayed kneeling long after everyone left, the earth damp under her knees, her hands trembling from something heavier than exhaustion. When she returned to Singapore, she expected quiet. Instead, the silence felt alive, like a house holding its breath. For weeks she waited for the knocking, the footsteps, the smell of earth, but none came. The mirror remained clear. The air no longer tasted of metal. She told herself it was over, but her wrist disagreed. Every morning, the faint mark seemed brighter in sunlight, as if the body kept its own memory ledger. She left her marketing job. The office was full of deadlines and neon screens, but all she could see were faces reflected in the glass at night, faint and waiting. She told HR she needed a sabbatical, a word polite enough to mask the truth, that she no longer trusted walls. She moved to a small flat near the coast, a place where salt air washed everything clean. There, she worked freelance, slept better, and stopped wearing watches. She walked by the water every morning, her bare feet leaving prints the tide erased before she turned back. The world, she thought, was merciful in small ways. Still, certain things never left. The sound of bracelets clinking haunted her dreams. She couldn't walk past jade stalls without feeling dizzy. A friend gifted her a necklace once. She smiled and said thank you, but never wore it. Objects had rules now, invisible as gravity. Gifts demanded awareness, not gratitude. She cleaned her apartment weekly with salt water, not because she believed in magic, but because belief itself was a form of order. When she cooked, she set aside a portion for the unseen. Rice and tea on the window ledge, nothing fancy. It was, she told herself, habit, not superstition. But habit and faith are cousins. She visited Kevin only once after the incident. The hospital corridors smelled sterile, but underneath the bleach was the faint scent of iron. Through the glass, she saw him sitting upright, eyes hollow, fingers twitching as if still removing invisible jewelry. He mumbled fragments, maybe prayers, maybe nonsense. The doctors called it trauma-induced psychosis. The monks would call it debt collected. Chloe didn't speak. She only placed her palm against the cold window and whispered, "It's done." Maybe he heard. Maybe the one who cursed them both did. Either way, the silence afterward felt like an answer. Months passed. Chloe built a new rhythm, mornings by the sea, afternoons designing memorial pages for grieving families, evenings with tea and the hum of the city. Her work had shifted. She now specialized in digital remembrance, virtual altars where names, dates, and memories glowed softly on screens. She lit incense before every project began, not for superstition but respect. "Every story wants to be seen," she told clients. Her grandmother visited and said, "You've learned the right trade, turning ghosts into gratitude." Chloe laughed, but it was true. August returned. Ghost month. Lanterns swung above Chinatown like slow red hearts. She walked through the market at dusk, past stalls selling paper effigies, past children giggling around small fires. An old vendor waved her over. "For protection," the woman said, holding out a jade charm. Chloe looked at it, green and cold under the fluorescent light, and shook her head gently. "I've returned what was taken," she said. "I'm protected enough." The vendor smiled, eyes bright with understanding. "Then you know the rule. What's returned stays quiet." Chloe nodded and walked on, heart lighter. Later that night she stopped at the river. The air smelled of sugar cane and smoke. Somewhere across the water, a radio played a funeral opera, thin, trembling, human. The city lights reflected in the current like thousands of small candles. She imagined the woman resting at last beneath Guangdong soil, her name remembered somewhere beyond reach. Chloe pressed her wrist to her chest. The skin was still pale, but warm. She could live with that. Some scars are not reminders of pain, but proof of return. She built her studio slowly, filling it with quiet things, paper cranes, photographs, sea glass. Every morning she opened the windows wide and let wind rearrange the curtains. No mirrors, only polished metal that blurred reflections enough to make them human again. Clients came to her because she understood the language of unfinished business. She didn't talk about her own, but when people said they felt something watching over them, she answered softly, "That means they trust you." The nights were different now. When the clock hit 3:47, she sometimes woke, not from fear, but from instinct, as though the hour itself wanted acknowledgement. She would sit up, listen to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant waves, the absence of knocking, and whisper, "Thank you." Then she would sleep again. A year later she returned to the Johor temple. The old monk recognized her and smiled. "You look well," he said. She admitted that sometimes she still felt the bracelet's weight. "That's not a haunting," he said. "That's memory. Memory is what you keep when you survive." She bowed, left a small donation, and walked out into sunlight that tasted like salt and forgiveness. Her life had become simple, almost ordinary, but in that simplicity she found peace. She cooked for herself, called her grandmother weekly, laughed more easily. Sometimes she saw couples arguing over rent or colleagues rushing to deadlines and thought how fragile it all was, how easily a single cursed object could turn order into chaos. Yet she didn't fear it anymore. Knowledge, after all, was protection too. When people asked if she believed in ghosts, she smiled. "I believe in consequence," she said. "Everything we touch touches back." It was an answer that satisfied the rational and the faithful alike. On the 7th night of the 7th month, she joined a group by the shore releasing paper boats with candles. She didn't write a name, didn't make a wish. She simply watched the tiny flames drift away and thought of debts, of balance, of gratitude. The wind from the sea carried warmth. Somewhere behind her, fireworks bloomed faintly over the city. The reflections danced across her wrist, bright and harmless. For once, she didn't flinch. When she finally turned home, the path was lit by street lamps swaying like patient sentinels. Her apartment waited, still, breathable, ordinary. She brewed tea, set a cup by the window, one for herself, one for whoever might still wander. The air stayed quiet, gentle. For the first time since everything began, Chloe felt not like a survivor, but like someone living again. She traced the faint white ring on her wrist and smiled. It no longer looked like a scar. It looked like closure. Rain slid down the windows of Isabel's small apartment in Quezon City, turning the streetlights into ribbons of gold and rust. It had been 3 nights since the exorcism attempt, and though the air smelled faintly of burnt herbs, the apartment no longer felt lighter. It felt expectant, like a stage after the curtain has fallen, but the actors still linger in the dark. The antique doll sat on the altar table, silent again, her cracked porcelain cheek repaired with resin and care. Isabel had cleaned her once more, perhaps out of pity, perhaps out of guilt. Beside the doll lay a thin photograph, yellowed at the edges, a family of 3. The little girl in the middle wore the same lace dress, the same ribbon on her head, and in the child's tiny hand, unmistakable, the same doll Isabel now owned. The priest had told her that every haunting has a reason, that spirits cling to what's unfinished. But what if the unfinished part wasn't revenge, but a plea to be remembered? Isabel couldn't sleep. She replayed the words from the old healer in Tondo, who had helped her gather the ritual items. The child isn't angry. She's confused. Call her name and she will answer. The problem was, no one knew her name. The antique dealer who sold the doll had inherited it from a collector in Cavite. Before that, it had been passed from house to house, generation to generation, leaving behind whispers, sudden sicknesses, and disappearances. Some families locked it in a chest, others left it by the roadside, hoping it would be taken far away. Yet somehow, it always found its way back. That night, Isabel decided to dig deeper. She went to the university archives where she taught, using her faculty ID to enter the records section after hours. The air smelled of old paper and mold, like secrets too long kept. With a flashlight between her teeth, she searched the local census data from the 1920s, cross-referencing addresses that matched the estate from which the doll supposedly originated. There it was. House of Don Miguel and Señora Sofia del Rosario, 1923. A photograph showed the mansion standing proud on Escolta Street, Manila's high society avenue during the American colonial years. But the next entry froze her blood. Family tragedy, 1926. Child deceased, pneumonia, doll recovered among personal effects. The girl's name was written in careful ink, Elena del Rosario, age 7. Isabel copied the name into her notebook. Elena. The sound carried a strange warmth, like a bell tone beneath the rain. When she whispered it aloud, the air in the archive seemed to tighten, as though something nearby had been listening for decades and had finally heard its name spoken again. She switched off the flashlight, uneasy. The shadows between the shelves moved like breathing. She left quickly, clutching the notebook to her chest, whispering to herself to stay rational. Ghosts are stories made of trauma, she thought, but trauma never dies. It just waits for someone to translate it. Back home, she prepared the ritual exactly as instructed, not as an act of banishment, but as a bridge. The table became an altar again, but this time, it wasn't about fear. She arranged salt in a wide circle, thick and unbroken, a symbolic boundary between the living and the dead. In the center, she placed the doll, the photograph, a candle of white beeswax, and a strand of red thread coiled like a sleeping serpent. The thread represented the bond, both love and captivity. Copal resin burned in a clay bowl, releasing smoke that smelled of pine and old churches. As the room filled with haze, Isabel felt her pulse slow. She called softly, "Elena, hija, are you still here?" For a long moment, nothing answered but the rain. Then the candle flickered once, twice, and steadied. The doll's glass eyes reflected the flame like twin moons. A faint tapping began, rhythmic, deliberate, from within the wooden frame of the table. Isabel's throat went dry. "If you can hear me," she said, voice trembling, "you are safe. No one will hurt you again. But you must tell me why you're still here." The tapping stopped. Then, faintly, the smell of salt water filled the air, not the salt of the ritual, but ocean salt, like the shore after a storm. And then came the whisper, a child's voice, thin and tremulous, from somewhere near the doll's mouth. "Mama said I couldn't leave. Mama said they'd forget me if I go." Isabel covered her mouth to keep from gasping. She had expected rage, not heartbreak. "Your mother bound you," she whispered. "She loved you too much to let you go." The doll's head tilted slightly, and the candle flame leaned toward it, drawn by an unseen breath. "Mama cried and tied the string," the voice said. "She said the world would take me, but the string hurt. It hurt so much." Isabel stared at the red thread, now trembling as though an invisible hand were touching it. She understood. The 1920s family, devastated by loss, had performed a binding ritual, an old blend of Spanish Catholicism and indigenous Tagalog magic, to keep the child's spirit attached to her doll. What was meant as love had become imprisonment. Grief had turned into a cage. Over the years, the doll had moved from house to house, but the bond had never broken, and Elena's pain had followed. Isabel steadied herself. "Elena," she said, "I know your name now. You can go home." She placed the photograph in front of the doll, aligning the tiny porcelain hands so they rested over the image. "Look, they're waiting for you." The candle flame bent forward again, stretching higher, golden white. The red thread began to curl and twist, slowly burning from one end, ember without heat. The salt circle crackled faintly, reacting to the unseen energy. In the smoke, Isabel saw shapes, not terrifying but tender, the faint outline of a woman holding a child, both formed from shifting light. The child looked confused, hesitant. "Am I really allowed?" the voice asked again. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, mija, you are. Your name has been spoken. That means you exist, even if you're not here." The doll's porcelain face seemed to soften. The hair, once stiff, drifted as if under water. The flame shimmered brighter, and for an instant, the entire room glowed in warm gold. Isabel heard one last whisper, clearer than before. "Tell them to be kind." Then the light folded inward like the closing of a flower, and the candle went out. Silence returned. The air no longer pressed on her lungs. The salt circle was still intact, the red thread gone, only a faint scorch mark on the wood. Isabel sat there for a long time, not daring to move. When she finally exhaled, she realized she had been holding her breath for minutes. She looked at the doll. Its eyes were different now, duller, lifeless, empty. For the first time since she had received it, the doll looked like an object, not a presence. She whispered, "Thank you," and reached forward to close its eyelids, which clicked gently shut. The next morning, Isabel took the doll to the church courtyard where the children of her school often played after Mass. She left it on the bench under a flame tree, its branches covered in scarlet blossoms that looked like tongues of fire. A caretaker sweeping leaves asked if she had forgotten something. "No," she said quietly. "I'm just returning it." The man shrugged, uninterested, and continued his work. But as Isabel walked away, she thought she heard faint laughter, not mocking, but free, like a child playing in sunlight. Later that day, she went back to her apartment. The atmosphere had changed entirely. The walls no longer felt close. The shadows didn't linger at the corners. Even her cat, which had hidden under the bed for weeks, now stretched lazily on the couch, purring. Isabel sat by the window with tea and watched the rain stop. The city glowed in afternoon light, and for the first time in a long while, she felt peace instead of fear. But the story didn't end there. Because when Isabel returned to her class on Monday, she found a small folded paper on her desk. It was written in a childish hand, the letters large and uneven. "Thank you, Ma'am Isabel. I remember now." There was no name, just a red thread tied loosely around the paper, not binding but decorating. She held it for a long moment before smiling and placing it in her journal. From that day forward, Isabel began collecting forgotten names, not of ghosts, but of students who had dropped out, of children from street shelters, of orphans without records. She started a weekend reading program in their honor, called it Project Elena. When people asked why, she simply said, "Because names keep us real, even the lost ones." The story of the doll traveled across Manila as a whispered rumor. Some said Isabel had burned it. Others said she donated it to a museum. The truth was simpler. One afternoon, a little girl from another district found it on that same bench. She took it home, played with it for a while, and eventually it broke. The pieces were buried in a backyard garden under a guava tree. Flowers grew well there, even in dry season. Years later, when Isabel herself grew older, she sometimes heard children laughing outside her classroom long after sunset. She never looked out to check. She only smiled, whispered a prayer, and kept writing lesson plans. The ghosts had become memories, and the memories had become lessons. And the lesson, as she told her students every ghost month, was always the same. Love is powerful, but love without release becomes a chain. In 1920s Manila, the Del Rosario family had been among the elite, landowners with European education and local influence. When Elena fell ill, doctors from the New American Hospital couldn't save her. In grief, Señora Sofia sought the old faith, the curanderas from Binondo, who mixed Catholic prayers with pre-colonial rituals. They promised a way for the mother to keep her daughter. The ritual required the child's favorite object, a red string and a spoken promise. Where you are, I will find you. Where I am, you will stay. The doll was prepared with hair threads and drops of blood, a sympathetic vessel, both shrine and prison. For decades, Sophia prayed to it, talked to it, even dressed it. But as time passed, her sanity waned. When she died, the house staff sold the belongings, including the doll. They said it wept the night before it was moved. By the 1940s, the mansion was gone, bombed during the war. Survivors who found the doll in the rubble kept it as a charm against loss. It passed through hands during post-war reconstruction, each owner facing strange misfortunes. In the 1970s, it was locked in a museum basement, catalogued without history. Then, in 2018, it surfaced again in a night market, where Isabel found it by accident, an antique she thought would make a good teaching prop for folklore class. The circle had completed itself without her knowing. Only when she learned the name did the pattern dissolve. Names, as the old prayers say, are keys. When Elena's name was spoken, it was as if every echo through 100 years finally found its home. The doll stopped being a vessel. The child stopped being a prisoner. And somewhere, beyond time, beyond city noise, a mother and daughter were together again, unbound. When Isabel revisited the ruins of Escolta on a heritage field trip, she stood by the site where the Del Rosario house once stood. A new commercial building had replaced it, glass and steel reflecting the afternoon sun. But in a narrow alley beside it, she found a small brass plate embedded in the wall, weathered, half buried in vines. It read, Elena del Rosario, beloved daughter, 1919 to 1926. The letters were almost gone, but the name was enough. Isabel placed a flower there, whispered thanks, and felt a breeze lift her hair, light, warm, almost playful. That night she dreamed of a girl running through an open field, sunlight on her hair, no doll in her hands, just freedom. When Isabel woke, she was crying, but the tears were not from fear. They were the kind of tears that end a story. Sometimes the ghosts that haunt us are not angry. They're waiting for permission to rest. And sometimes mercy is not forgetting the dead, but remembering their names. What would you do if a free gift appeared at your door during Ghost Month? Would curiosity make you open it, or would instinct make you walk away? In many parts of Asia, Ghost Month isn't just folklore. It's a reminder that life and afterlife coexist in a fragile balance. The belief is simple. Every gift, every invitation carries intent. Accepting something without knowing the giver may bind you to unseen debt, emotional, spiritual, or karmic. During the 7th lunar month, doors between worlds are said to open. That's why people avoid signing contracts, swimming at night, or picking up abandoned objects. These aren't superstitions. They're boundaries of respect, drawn from centuries of collective experience. Chloe found peace by returning what wasn't hers. Isabel found freedom through compassion, not fear. Both remind us that the unseen deserves acknowledgement, not arrogance. So tonight, if you see an unmarked box on your doorstep, maybe light a stick of incense and let it be. What do you think? Would you keep it or let it go? Comment your answer below. Subscribe for more true stories from across Asia.